It rises like a crown at the eastern end of the National Mall. White stone, iron dome, a monument not to a person, but to a process. This is the United States Capitol, where laws are written, debates rage, protests gather, and power is transferred without gunfire. It is not just a building. It is the beating heart of American democracy. But its origins are messy, political, contested. It was born in backroom compromise, built through division, shaped by enslaved labor, and nearly reduced to ashes by war. And yet it stands, rebuilt, expanded, reimagined, again and again. This is the story of the Capitol building, a house for the people, shaped by principle and power, tragedy and triumph. And like the democracy it represents, it's still becoming. The United States had won its independence, but in 1790, it was still fighting to become a nation. 13 states, loosely tied by revolution, were deeply divided by geography, economy, and ideology. The location of the permanent national capital became a symbolic battleground. Northern leaders favored New York or Philadelphia, established cities of commerce and influence. Southern leaders pushed for a location further south, closer to agriculture, slavery, and their economic power base. The result: one of America's first and most consequential political bargains, the Compromise of 1790. At a private dinner hosted by Thomas Jefferson, he, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton struck a deal. Hamilton would secure federal assumption of state war debts, a Northern priority. In return, Jefferson and Madison would win a Southern capital, placed along the Potomac River. And just like that, the capital would be built from scratch. President George Washington, himself a Virginian, selected the precise location. Land carved from Maryland and Virginia. The terrain was swampy, undeveloped, and mosquito-ridden. To turn vision into plan, Washington chose Pierre-Charles L'Enfant, a French-born engineer and Revolutionary War veteran. L'Enfant envisioned a capital of symbolism and order. Wide boulevards, ceremonial spaces, and key buildings set on elevated ground to project grandeur. At the very center of it all, a building not for monarchs, but for the people, the Capitol. With the new capital rising from the wilderness, one question remained. What would its most important building look like? In 1792, the federal government announced a design competition for the United States Capitol. It wasn't just about bricks and blueprints. It was about identity. This structure would represent the soul of the young republic. Dozens of entries arrived, each offering different visions of power. Some mimicked European royal halls, all marble facades and opulence. Others looked more like military fortresses, intimidating and severe. Few struck the right balance between beauty, function, and philosophy. Then came a surprise submission. Dr. William Thornton, a physician by profession, was not an architect, but he was a thinker, an idealist. His design was neoclassical, symmetrical, balanced, and symbolic. It featured a central rotunda capped with a dome, flanked by two legislative wings, one for the Senate, one for the House. President George Washington personally approved the plan. Though L'Enfant objected, Washington saw in Thornton's vision the simplicity and dignity of a government by the people. To refine and implement the plan, James Hoban, already building the president's house, was brought in. Surveyors began leveling Jenkins Hill, which stood at the city's highest elevation. From the beginning, the Capitol was never meant to be a palace. It was designed to be a temple of democracy, grand enough to inspire, but grounded enough to serve. A building that would reflect power and purpose. By 1793, the Capitol building was no longer just a drawing. It was becoming reality. The site, Jenkins Hill, was a gentle rise above the Potomac. It was cleared, leveled, and surveyed by a small army of laborers, free and enslaved alike. This part of the story is rarely told. Much like the White House, the U.S. Capitol was partially built by enslaved African Americans. The government leased them from local enslavers in Maryland and Virginia. They cut timber, dug trenches, quarried sandstone from nearby Aquia Creek, and transported it by barge to the building site. They worked long hours in tough conditions, laying the foundation of what would become one of the most iconic political structures in the world. Without rights, without recognition. Construction was slow and difficult. Work began with the North Wing, intended to house the Senate. President George Washington himself laid the cornerstone on September the 18th, 1793, in a Masonic ceremony. A symbolic act affirming both national unity and institutional order. The building took shape piece by piece. Classical columns, red sandstone walls, and carved ornamentation that blended beauty with strength. Meanwhile, laborers dealt with design changes, supply shortages, weather delays, and inconsistent pay. It was a monumental effort, not just of architecture, but of endurance. And though the structure was still incomplete, by 1800 it was ready enough for Congress to move in. America's experiment in self-government finally had a physical home. By 1814, the Capitol stood partially completed. Proud, symbolic, and fragile. Then came war. The United States had entered a second conflict with Great Britain, the War of 1812. And this time, the fight came home. On August 24th, 1814, British troops invaded Washington, D.C. The city was sparsely defended. The capital was undefended. British soldiers marched directly to the seat of American government. They entered the Capitol, looted its halls, and set it ablaze. Flames devoured the Senate chamber. The House wing collapsed. Books, desks, and records gone in hours. The smoke from the Capitol fire rose over a stunned and humiliated nation. President James Madison and his cabinet fled. Dolly Madison famously stayed behind at the White House just long enough to save George Washington's portrait. The Capitol received no such rescue. By morning, it was a blackened shell, its columns scorched, its rotunda roofless. And yet, amid the ashes, the idea of democracy endured. Congress quickly vowed to rebuild. Moving the Capitol was considered and rejected. Rebuilding the Capitol became a statement. America would not retreat. Architects Benjamin Latrobe and Charles Bulfinch took charge of restoration. Stone was salvaged. Designs were reimagined. By the early 1820s, the Capitol rose again, stronger, prouder, and with a deeper story etched into every beam and block. A monument reborn from fire. As the United States expanded westward, the Capitol had to grow with it. By the 1850s, the original structure could no longer hold a growing Congress. New states meant new senators and representatives. The chambers were overcrowded, the hallways cramped. So in 1851, Congress approved a massive expansion. 2 new wings, one for the House, one for the Senate, along with a new central dome to replace the original low-profile rotunda. The cast-iron dome, now one of the most iconic images in America, was designed by Thomas U. Walter. It soared over the city, symbolizing a rising, ambitious nation. But construction didn't stop for conflict. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, some called for halting work on the dome. President Abraham Lincoln insisted it continue. He believed the Capitol must reflect national endurance, that in a time of fracture the building itself must rise. And rise it did. Completed in 1866, the dome crowned the Capitol with a sense of permanence and aspiration. At its peak stands the Statue of Freedom, a bronze allegory standing watch over a republic still testing its own promises. The building had changed, just as the nation had, expanding, adapting, striving toward its ideals. More than a workplace, the Capitol has always been a stage. Here, the nation's most profound moments unfold, victories and defeats, promises and reckonings. Every 4 years, the world watches as presidents place their hands on a Bible and swear to preserve, protect, and defend. Inauguration Day is not held in a palace courtyard, but on the steps of a building open to the public. That matters. Inside the Capitol, presidents deliver the State of the Union, while lawmakers rise in applause or sit in silent opposition. Debates rage. Deals are made. History is shaped. Outside, it has been a canvas for democracy in motion. Suffragists marched here. Civil rights leaders gathered. Veterans, students, and workers have raised their voices on the very steps where leaders ascend. In 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. stood just down the National Mall and dreamed aloud of a better America, within view of the Capitol Dome. The building listens, it witnesses, and it records. It is more than architecture, it's a civic stage, open to every American, regardless of power or party. A place where the people, too, can speak. A house that hosts the Republic and reflects it. Still, the people's house. The Capitol is not just where government happens. It's where the American story unfolds. It was born in compromise, shaped by conflict, built by many hands, and rebuilt in defiance. It has been burned, expanded, protested, celebrated, and still it stands. In stone and steel, it reflects our best ideals and our deepest debates. It is a building, but also a promise that democracy is not fixed, but forged, over time, in full view of the people. This is Washington Chronicles. If this story moved you, subscribe and share. Because the Capitol is not just history. It's a living, breathing symbol of what we fight for and what we must never take for granted.